Hello and welcome back. Or if you're new here, welcome. Let's take a look at what we'll be making. We'll be making this responsive image grid. You can see that the left image is vertical and it has two images on the right. The top image is slightly smaller than the bottom one. Let me show you that. Um, Here, as you can see that the top image is slightly smaller than the bottom one. So this is what we'll be making. Can you think of a way how we can go about making this? If not, then follow along with me and I will show you how to do it. So, okay, so I have this grid container here and I also have three images that we have in our grid container, and we also have classes called img1, 2, and 3. And we also have a style sheet, style.css here, okay? So let's take a look at our style sheet. Now in the style sheet, I already have some basic styling, like I have font size, and I've done a basic reset here where I've set the margin and padding to 0. And I've also set a font family, although this is not really needed. And I've also set overflow to hidden. Okay, and for the images as well, I've done some basic styling. I have added a border radius and I've added a bit of a box shadow. So you can see that these are our three images that we have. Okay, so now let's make an image grid. All right, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to set up our grid container. So container, this will be our grid container and display grid. Okay. And next thing, as we learned earlier, we need to create some columns, and we can do that using our repeat function. So let's begin with creating three columns with a width of 1 fr each. Now let's go ahead and take a look at our developer tools in Grid and inspect the grid. So you can see we have three columns here, but our images are kind of overflowing right now. You can see the image 2 and 3 are not visible. So let's go ahead and fix that. So back in our image here, let's set the width to 100%. And now, as you can see, all of our images are fitting inside the grid cell here. So, but there's one problem here, is that as you can see, although the images are contained within the grid cells, but there is also some space underneath it. So what we want is we want the images to take up exactly as much space as the grid cell, with width and height. So let's fix that now. So instead of width, now let's adjust the height as well. So height is 100% as well. And now we have adjusted the height. Let me just in fact minimize this a little bit. Now you can see that the aspect ratio of the images is not right. As you can see that the third image, the pizza image, now that doesn't look right. So let's go ahead and fix that as well. So we have this really handy property here called object fit. Object fit, what this does is this is like background size but for images. So we can set this to cover like that. Now you can see that the image is actually fitting properly and the aspect ratio is also fixed. Now that we have our images fixed, now the next step is to actually create our grid. So we already have three columns. Let's also create a bunch of rows here. So grid template rows. Again, I'm going to use repeat, and let us start with say 6 rows, and let's give this each row a height of 7. Viewport width. Why viewport width? Because when we reduce the screen size, we want the images to remain responsive, and we want the images to maintain their aspect ratio. Although you cannot see this now, but you will see this more clearly towards the end, where I'll show it to you in more detail. But bear with me for now. So we will keep this aspect ratio, we will keep this as 7 viewport width. All right. And we'll also, let's give it a grid gap as well. Well, we're added grid gap of 10 pixel. Okay. And now let's go ahead and position our images. So let's select our second image first of all. So this will be image 2, and we need to move this into the first column. So this will be grid column, and that will be line. So here line number 1, and we want it to finish at line number 2. Okay, so as you can see, the second image is now in the first column, but we also want this to take up the entire, all of the rows that we have here. So we can say grid row, if I can type properly, grid row. Um, Now we want this to take up row 1 through 6, all of these rows. So we can say something like that, finish, start at line number 1 and finish at line number 7 here. And there you go. As you can see, now our image is taking up the entire, all of the rows. So this looks good. Now let's go ahead and take care of our first image. So image 1, this will be grid column. And in this case, we want this image to span 2 columns. Remember, we learned about the keyword span in our previous video. So let's span this 2 columns. Excellent. And also span this 2 rows. Grid row, span 2. Okay. It's still it looks better, but maybe we should span it 3. All right, that looks much better. So now let's take our third image, which is img3. And again, grid column, we want this to span 2. And in terms of row, grid row, we want this to span 3. Now the images are equal, but we want the bottom image to take up more space than the top one. So instead, let's add another row here. So add repeat 7. Now we have 7 rows, and all we need to do is we need to select the second image, img2, and change this to 1/8. And we also need to select the third image, which is img3, and span it 4 rows. And with this, we have a responsive image grid. Now, remember I said that you will see how it's beneficial. So now if I reduce the screen size, you can see that, let me enable the grid here. You can see that the size of the rows remains the same. So which in turn, maintains the aspect ratio of our images even when we reduce the screen size. As you can see, and this is how you make a responsive image grid. In the complete CSS Grid course, you will also learn how to make complicated layouts using grids, and more importantly, you will get a very realistic experience of building a commercial level project. So do check that out and see you next time. Bye.